back to our normal numbers. Doesn't matter. Congratulations to you who have managed to come here. May Allah increase you in your tawfiqat and bless you to constantly adhere to those things which we should adhere to. And certainly, it is tiring. It is demanding, especially when Friday is not the day off. Make time and come here, and may Allah accept that from you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises in the Quran, هو الذي أرسل رسوله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله ولو كره الكافرون. He is the one who has sent his messenger with the religion of truth to make it overcome all others. Even though the deniers would hate to see that happen. Now, obviously, there's three ways in which we can understand this verse. Three lessons that we can take from this verse, three meanings that are involved in it. First and foremost, of course, it means that the religion of Islam is the religion of reason. It is the religion that appeals to the human intellect. It is the logical faith. It is through the forcefulness of its arguments. It is through the appeal of the truth that is apparent in it that it will overcome all other religions. And this is the first and foremost meaning of Allah has sent a religion that is so beautiful, it is so simple, it is so appealing, it is so viable for everyone, that it is so in tune with the human fitrah and the innate nature, that it will overcome all other religions. Anyone who will, without bias, examine Islam in comparison to any other faith or lack of faith, will understand its appeal and will be drawn towards it. This is the first and foremost meaning of لِيُظْهِرَهُ عَلَى الدِّينِ كُلِّهِ. The second meaning that is involved in that is, of course, the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have another verse, وَلِيُظْهِرَهُ عَلَى الدِّينِ كُلِّهِ وَلَوْ كَانَ الْمُشْرِكُونَ. Even if the mushrikun are opposed to that happening, which is that Allah has promised His Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that the religion of Islam will overcome the opponents, the kuffar and the mushrikun who were opposing him at that time, and the Muslims will be victorious against their enemies. And obviously that is something that, happened again first and foremost through the process of the appeal of the religion, the conversion of the Arab tribes, etc. But of course the core opponents of Islam, which were the kuffar and the mushrikun of Quraysh, were not convinced by the arguments of Islam, which they had heard for 13 years before the Hijrah, and which they had vehemently rejected. Rather, what made the Prophet and the Muslims overcome these enemies was, of course, the force that they wielded. Of course, it ended up happening that in the conquest of Mecca, no blood was shed. It was a bloodless sort of victory that Allah ensured to the believers. However, this physical and worldly might was required in order to overcome the enemies. And the Prophet ﷺ did that by first establishing the Hukuma Islamiyya, the Islamic government in Medina, and then through that calling others to join this revolution, to join this movement, to join this religion, and building his alliances. And then he was able to, with a display of force, which was the gathering of the mighty army that came to Mecca, to conquer it without sort of shedding any blood, by convincing the people of Mecca that their leadership were not the invincible leaders that they thought that they were. This was the power of Quraysh. It was not that they had the most powerful army in Arabia. It was the sort of prestige that they had. This is what made all the other tribes fear Quraysh. It was not because they had the strongest soldiers or the most weaponry or something. It's because everyone thought of their prestige as being sort of invincible and no one can oppose them in that regard. And when that prestige was shattered, when the Prophet Muhammad
Salli ala Muhammad wa ali
when
Muhammad.
he came with his army there and they saw that there is no opposing his forces, that prestige was shattered, as we said, without a single blow, the Mecca was conquered. And you may draw lessons from that to the current situation as you wish, of course. The parallels are obvious. And the third meaning of the verse, وَالَّذِي أَرْسَلَ رَسُولَهُ بِالْهُدَى وَدِينِ الْحَقِّ, that the third meaning of the verse, that Allah has sent His messenger with the guidance and the religion of truth to overcome all other religions or all other opponents, is of course the final manifestation of that verse, the ta'wil of that verse, if we will, the coming, which is the coming of the Imam al-Mahdi, Ajallahu ta'ala farajahu sharif, the awaited savior of mankind, who will, as we have in the narrations, fill the earth with justice after it was filled with injustice. So this is the final manifestation of that promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He has given to the believers and the Prophet Muhammad, that there will come a time when finally all mankind will embrace Islam, and the just society which Allah has promised to mankind, that which was always within our grasp if we had wished it and if we had truly worked towards it, will come with the appearance of the Mahdi. However, the coming of the Mahdi is also something that it is conditioned. It has clauses, and the conditions and clauses of that are the previous two things that we mentioned. That the believers must strive in, first of all, presenting the rational and reasonable arguments of Islam to mankind, so that he who will accept it, and that they must become united and build their sort of strength, so that when the Mahdi comes, they can aid him in that which he must be aided in. And this is the final manifestation of the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the believers, which He has made in the Quran. Now, obviously we can't end the speech without at least some discussion about the events that have happened in the last week, which has, of course, had everyone in the world discussing them. And as was obvious from what we discussed earlier, of course, the main point that we can make today is that the events of the last week and this morning has shown to the world that this illusion that the occupying state of Israel has woven about itself, which is that it is undefeatable and no one can challenge its might, and if anyone dares to do so, they will be severely punished and destroyed, and so on and so forth, which is sort of has been this has been shattered in the events of the last week, and it has been shown that there is no more need for Muslim nations to sheepishly submit to the colonial forces represented by Israel, by the US and its allies, who have sort of imposed their will against the people of the Middle East, who have destabilized governments, who have propped up dictators, who have started wars, who have helped terrorist organizations and movements throughout that region. And finally, the time has come where people are able to say that enough is enough, and there is a line that has been drawn. And it is time for Israel to change its ways, for America and its allies to change their policies, and to realize that they cannot continue in this way, that they cannot keep denying the Palestinian people their basic human rights, that they must recognize that the governments in that region have a right to self-determination. Unfortunately, obviously, in the UN vote, for recognition of Palestinian statehood, we once again saw the US in complete isolation once again vetoed that vote. However, I do believe that it is not far from now that this situation will change as well, and that even the US will be forced to admit and to recognize a Palestinian state and to grant them that freedom and justice that they deserve. However, thus far, the hypocrisy, of course, is visible to everyone. And unfortunately, here in Finland, we have not been saved from such hypocrisy from our heads of state either. And the most glaring example of that is how our president condemned the Iranian retaliation against Israel, whereas there was no such condemnation from him or from any other heads of European states about the Israeli attack on the Iranian embassy, the consulate, contrary to international law, contrary to the Vienna Agreement, a clear war crime, and yet no condemnation was forthcoming, let alone any condemnation about the murder and genocide of Palestinians that has been going on for the last half a year, or the illegal occupation that has preceded that for decades. And unfortunately, this hypocrisy is something that has shattered the credibility of such leaders, so to speak, and that they have no moral authority. And that is unfortunate, especially in the case of Finland, which has long prided itself as being a voice of reason and morality in the world stage, and that has now unfortunately completely been lost and discredited. And we hope that future administrations in the Finnish government will back away from such hypocritical policies and embrace reason and morality. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله